Welcome to Sensible Transfers. Here's how this is going to work. We're going to take a team, we're going to identify weaknesses in that team, and then we're going to suggest transfers that we think solve those problems. Now, it's worth saying from the off that we're not interested in responding to rumours. This is just us thinking about how you might fix these problems on the pitch. So let's start with our first team, Arsenal. So on the board in front of me, I've got Arsenal. The big problem here is Gabriel Jesus. He has just got injured playing for Brazil. He's thought to be out for 3 months. And this poses a problem for Arsenal because Arsenal are currently top of the league, 5 points clear of Manchester City, and Gabriel Jesus is a big reason why they are there. So this poses a dilemma for Arsenal because they do have backup players who they could use to replace him. You've got Eddie Nketiah here, and you've also got other players like Smith Rowe, Fabio Vieira at a push you could probably put there. But because Arsenal are top of the league, because they are ahead of Manchester City, they are probably going to want to throw the kitchen sink at this title challenge. And so that means they're probably going to be looking for a replacement. But before we can start identifying replacements, we need to talk a little bit about what it is that Gabriel Jesus does, because he is not your typical centre forward. So on the board here, I've just got how Arsenal might set up in an attacking phase. Arsenal are quite positional when they attack, and what I mean by that is that they're going to identify these channels between the opposition back four as danger channels that can be exploited by their players. So they're going to try and get a player into each one of these channels. And then we've got Gabriel Jesus here, who'll be in the central channel more often than not because he is a centre forward. You do want him to have a box presence. You want him to be able to finish the chances that arise. But Gabriel Jesus is about a lot more than that. Actually, when you watch Gabriel Jesus play, you wouldn't be surprised to see him dropping out to the left-hand side in particular. Does drop across to the right as well, but the left in particular, he likes to get into these sorts of areas because he is a fantastic technical player. What he can do is he can pick the ball up in these sorts of areas and he can carry the ball, dribble it past players into the box. He can pull players out of position and then generate chances for his teammates as well. Just a really, really all-round flexible player, and he adds a lot to Arsenal's front line. And this shows up really nicely in the data. So I've got a pizza chart for Gabriel Jesus' season so far. This green area here is the possession statistics. And as we can see, carry and dribble volume, really good. He's a really good technical player. He's able to retain the ball really well as well. So that helps him in breaking down these low blocks that Arsenal will come up against. But he's also really good at link-up play as well. He's really good at bringing other players into the game. And the result of that is all of this production here. You can see that he is generating expected goals for his team, and that is what we want. And actually, it is also worth noticing how much red there is here, because that's the defensive chunk of the data here. And he's really good out of possession. He adds a huge amount to Arsenal's out of possession, and Mikel Arteta is really high on making sure all of his players can contribute to the off-ball stuff as well. And so Gabriel Jesus is just perfect for what Arsenal want. And the data also shows up really nicely the variety of positions that Gabriel Jesus likes to take up. So I've got a couple of heat maps here. This is Alexander Lacazette, much more of a standard striker for Arsenal. You can see that he's very centrally located, but Gabriel Jesus just picking up the ball all around the final third, and you can see that's very non-standard for a striker. So now we know how Gabriel Jesus plays, we can start looking at potential replacements. But before that, we need a caveat, and that is it is January, which changes things. It's tricky to buy players midway through a season, and also the number 9 market is pretty scarce at the moment as well. So that makes this task fairly difficult. So we have considered a lot of players who we have just pushed out from the off because it just is impractical at this time of year. So that brings us to our first sensible transfer suggestion, which is Barcelona's Memphis Depay. Now, Memphis Depay is a 28-year-old who has been playing as a striker for Barcelona. Profiles really nicely with Gabriel Jesus because he's not only played as a striker for his teams, but he's also played as a wide forward on the left-hand side as well. So he's operating in a lot of the same spaces as Gabriel Jesus. Practicalities-wise, he is on a contract which ends in the summer, which makes him available. And that's really important for us because he is the sort of player that Arsenal could feasibly bring in. So Memphis Depay profiles very similarly to Gabriel Jesus, and this shows up really nicely in the data as well. So most importantly, goals. He is scoring goals. That's what Arsenal need. And he's not just scoring goals, he is getting into the right situations for goals as well. So his expected goals numbers are good as well. But obviously it's not just all about goals. We know that Gabriel Jesus is so useful for Arsenal because he drifts into wider positions, because he's a really technical player on the ball. He can create moments for Arsenal, and Memphis Depay is no different. So again, another really technical ball carrier and dribbler. He is someone who can generate chances as well. So as you can see here, really good key passes numbers, really good passes into the final third numbers as well. So he's going to drop deep, pick the ball up and help in that link-up play. But also he's going to assist his teammates as well. And so profile-wise, really, really good in terms of his crossover with Gabriel Jesus. But the other upside to Memphis Depay is his flexibility, because this is a temporary replacement for Gabriel Jesus. So when Gabriel Jesus comes back in a couple of months, you will be able to use Memphis as a backup to Gabriel Jesus, but also you'll be able to use him as a backup to Gabriel Martinelli as well on the left, which is currently a depth problem for Arsenal, although they have been reported to be quite interested in Mikhailo Mudryk from Shakhtar Donetsk in that position as well. But there is a downside to Memphis Depay, and that is he's maybe not as good out of possession as Mikel Arteta might want from his number 9. We've already said that Gabriel Jesus offers a lot to Arsenal in terms of what he can do in pressing, and Memphis Depay is just not at that level. You can see his defensive metrics here towards the lower end of the spectrum, which is why I want to offer a different suggestion for the number 9 position at Arsenal, and that is this: Liverpool's Roberto Firmino. Now, Roberto Firmino is a name that will be familiar to a lot of you, but he is also a very feasible transfer for Arsenal. He is out of contract in the summer, which means that he will be available for cheaper, and with Liverpool out of the title race, there's probably more likelihood that they'll be happy to sell him to Arsenal as well. And profile-wise, he's absolutely perfect. He's got goals, he has the link-up play sorted, his goal and shot creation is great as well, and in terms of the defensive stuff, he profiles really nice defensively, and we also know that he can play in a really high, intense pressing system because he has done for Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool for the last few seasons. Now, we've talked a lot about how Gabriel Jesus likes to drift into wider areas to help his team in the build-up. Would Roberto Firmino be able to do the same sorts of things? Well, let's check the data on this, because we've got the touch map for Gabriel Jesus this season. As you can see, he does have a lot of touches in this wide left area. There's a lot in the right as well. But if we take a look at Roberto Firmino's touch map from a couple of seasons ago when he was playing more regularly for Liverpool, you can see that he's also picking the ball up in these wider areas too. Yes, he is a little bit more centrally located here, but he is able to pick the ball up in those wide areas and build up from there as well. So Roberto Firmino profiles really nicely with Gabriel Jesus. He has thrived at the highest level of the Premier League. He won it with Liverpool as well. And he's also played in a really intense pressing system under Jurgen Klopp. And so for these reasons, Firmino is my pick to replace Gabriel Jesus at Arsenal. Another area where Arsenal could strengthen in January is in the central midfield area. Now, they have plenty of backup to Martin Ødegaard here, but actually when you look at the other two midfielders, Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, there's much less depth there. Now, there is some depth behind Thomas Partey in Mo Elneny and Sambi Lokonga, but neither of those two players is probably at the level that Mikel Arteta would expect from that position. But when we come to Granit Xhaka, a player who's been really important for Arsenal this season, there's just no depth whatsoever, and this does raise a problem for Arsenal going into the second half of this season with a title challenge on their hands. So again, to help us profile replacements, we're going to look at Partey and Xhaka's roles in the Arsenal team. Arsenal are a possession team. They're going to want to hold on to the ball as long as possible, progress it down the field and generate dangerous chances there. And so that means that the defensive midfielder will function as a pivot in those moments. So he's going to sit in between everyone. He's going to be able to cycle the possession around and make sure that Arsenal can move the ball down the field. But when Arsenal are in the final third, they're going to leave themselves open at the back, and so the defensive midfielder then has a lot of responsibility if the opposition turns the ball over, counterattacks, to then break down those counter-attacking moments. So you need someone who's defensively solid, but someone who's also good enough on the ball to help them move the ball down the field. So Granit Xhaka's role is slightly more unique, but actually overlaps a lot with what Thomas Partey is doing. So in the build-up phases, Granit Xhaka is expected to help out in the build-up. If, for example, Zinchenko goes forward, he might be expected to drop in and help in that build-up phase as well, offering defensive cover behind him. But also when Arsenal are in the final third, what we've started seeing more often this season is Granit Xhaka filling in this left half space, getting into that final line of attack and being a creative force in that kind of area as well. So you're going to need someone who is able to be involved in build-up, is going to be able to progress the ball through passing or carrying, and then someone who's going to offer some kind of creativity in the final third as well. Which brings us to the first sensible transfer suggestion for this position: Manu Kone, who plays for Borussia Mönchengladbach in the Bundesliga. Now, Manu Kone is a 21-year-old who signed for Gladbach last season from Toulouse in Liga, and he was able to make the step up to the Bundesliga from Liga, which will make Arsenal confident that he could make the step up into the Premier League. But Manu Kone is probably the best Granit Xhaka replacement on the market right now. At the moment for Gladbach, he plays on the left side of a double pivot, similar to the way that Granit Xhaka does for Arsenal, and he's also involved in all the same phases of play that Granit Xhaka is involved in as well. So he can drop deep, helping the build-up passing around the back, but then he can progress the ball forward, particularly through his ball carrying and dribbling. And then in the final third, he also offers upside as well. He can get to the edge of the box and cause problems for oppositions as well. So the perfect Granit Xhaka replacement. And this shows up quite nicely in the data. The thing that stands out most for me is his dribbling and ball carrying. You can see here really good dribbling numbers, 99th percentile in terms of dribbles completed across the top 5 leagues. But a really interesting dribbler because he's not necessarily the most technical of dribblers, but actually what he is able to do is use his athleticism to actually ease past players and make sure that the ball moves down the field. He reminds me a lot of Spurs' Moussa Dembele, if you remember him. But then elsewhere, in terms of moving the ball through passing, you can see that he's putting up good numbers here, and then defensively really solid numbers as well. So I think this is the real Granit Xhaka replacement that Arsenal should be looking for. But Arsenal aren't just looking to find a backup for Granit Xhaka, they're also looking to find a player who could back up Thomas Partey as well. And that's where the questions start arising for Manu Kone. Could he play in that single pivot position, or is he better off with someone alongside himself? And actually, if you consider the position in that way, there's a much better option on the market, and that is AC Milan's Ismail Benacer. Now, Ismail Benacer is basically good at everything. As you can see in the data, he's really good in terms of passing the ball, so he'll be able to progress the ball in that manner. His dribbling, not quite so good as Manu Kone, but still very impressive, and also out of possession, really strong all the way across the board as well. He's also played as a single pivot before. He's played in a double pivot. He's also played as the outside midfielder in a 3. He can play all of these positions in midfield. Benacer is also 25 years old, so he's just moving into his prime. He does have a couple of years left on his contract at Milan, but there is a buyout clause there, believed to be in the region of around 50 million euros. So there's a big question about whether or not Arsenal will be willing to shell out that kind of money, but they have shown that they can do that in the past, because they did the same with Thomas Partey when they brought him in from Atletico Madrid, paying a big buyout clause there as well. There is one caveat here, which is that Ismail Benacer has played for Arsenal before. He went through the youth system with Arsenal, and so there is a slight question about whether or not he'd be willing to go back, given that he was moved on as a youngster. But assuming that that is the case and that Arsenal can get him, I think that Ismail Benacer would be a perfect backup to Xhaka and Thomas Partey, and so for that reason, he's my sensible transfer for this position. So here's the Arsenal team with our 2 sensible transfers included. Arsenal are going into the second half of the season in a title challenge. Manchester City are breathing down their necks, but with these 2 players in the squad, Arsenal will be much less worried about injuries slowing their momentum.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic brings you the best sports journalism in the world in a personalised experience, connecting you with the stories and teams that you care about the most. There's coverage of 13 sports, plus direct access to world-class journalists through live Q&As, discussions and podcasts. And you can try it now for free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description.